Bonjour.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 3. We're going to start this roundtable, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm Alexandra Ben Said. I'm a journalist for France Inter. Today, this will be a high-level international panel. Some panelists will speak English. If you need translation, please take a headset. How can we encourage the rise of a new middle class? That's the title of this session. And as a journalist, I can't help but wonder, what is middle class? And I'm really interested in knowing our panelists' definition of a middle class. As I was preparing this roundtable, I hadn't realized the concerns of the middle class. They're scared of being left out, the struggle to live, and this is a feeling that is present everywhere in the world. So we'd like this session to set the scene, to have an overview of the situation. We'll get the unique point of view of each of our panelists that I will introduce in a second. Are there any major choices to make? With which terms, assets, wealth, public services? How can we encourage the rise of a new middle class? Really far away from me is the Minister of Finance from India, Nirmala Sitharaman. Mrs. Minister, welcome. You are in a BJP, from the BJP party. How long have you been Minister for Finance? I see from 2019, but you've been there much longer, right? Do you have a microphone?
2019 2019.
Ok. 2019. Je salue également.
Welcome, Nadia Fitalawi, Minister of Economy and Finance of Morocco. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Véronique Bédag, the CEO of the Nexity Group. We'll talk about housing, and this is a common point to all the middle classes concerns. And finally, Joaquim Miranda Sarmento, Minister of Finance for Portugal. Welcome. We have 1 hour, so each panelist will say a few words of introduction. Then there will be a question and answer sessions, and I hope you have many questions because our panelists have much to share. But now, over to a member of the Cercle des Économistes who invented this session, Patrick Artis. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. What can we say about the middle class and the issues they face? First of all, Europe shouldn't adopt the American model, because in the US, the consumption of the 20% of Americans having a median revenue, which is a revenue that is a little lower to the average median revenue. It is worth $1,300 billion, while the consumption of the 20% wealthiest Americans is much greater. So there is a wide gap in consumption and wealth in the US. We do not want to get there in Europe, because there is a widening of the gap in income and consumption power. And today we'll hear about India, and Morocco, and Portugal, and I'll take the example of France. And I will tell you about the causes of the middle class issues in France. If you take a look at survey, middle class French people don't have much hope for the future. They think that their children will have it worse than them, so there are issues there. But there's a collective dimension here. There's a gap between the progress of the level of education and the evolution of the job patterns. If you take a look at the share of French people who have more than a degree, it went from 9 to 25% in a few years. So there was a sharp rise of the level of qualification of the population. But if we turn to jobs accessible to French middle class, those are intermediary jobs, and they're less qualified. And the number of these jobs has fallen by 6%. And the job market has a gap, which is widening. Some jobs that are moderately qualified are being destroyed right in the middle of the scale of qualification. So some middle-class French people are better qualified than 10, 15 years ago, but there are less jobs accessible to them, which means that they will be sidelined on the job market, which is what one first cause of frustration in the middle class. Secondly, there's a second cause of frustration and anxiety in the middle class. The educational system doesn't suppress family-based disequalities. There's no contribution to the social ladder. There are studies about what we call destiny. They show the socio-professional category of children, of parents. So take a French adolescent. If their parents is working class, they have 60-70% probability to become a working class, and they have only 15 to 20% to access executive role of freelance professions. So there is a really wide social gap in France. How come? We must take a look at the educational system, as I've already said. And there are several surveys about the education system performance. You all know the PISA study or the TEAMS study that measures the level of mathematics and various other science disciplines among pupils. And if we take a look at these studies, France is one of the world's countries where the parents' social level gap has the biggest impact on school results. The PISA study shows a gap in PISA score for mathematics, and there's a gap between children whose parents are well off and children with parents that are poorer. And this is a wide gap, which is much wider than in other countries, and even if we compare to other European countries. So this gap is much greater than in Finland or even some Southern Europe countries. So there is a social inertia because the educational system perpetuates social inequalities from the start. You have 1 minute left. And there's a third cause, the weight of forced expenses. Those expenses you cannot avoid, and this is spending for housing, first of all, for insurance, and so on. And for the middle class, this forced spending represents 30% of their income, and it has risen in the past decades. And fourth and last issue, there is a huge gap between gross wages and net wages. You know that the OECD measures the tax wedge, which is the gap between the cost of employment for the employer and the net wages received by the employers. This is a 1-to-2 ratio. The work costs twice more in France than in other countries, and it's much higher than in other European countries, which is the last cause of frustration among the middle class. What should we do? We should redevelop jobs that match the qualification of the middle class, which is not easy because jobs will be greatly affected by AI in the future. So we need to reform the educational system. We can't keep a system which aims to classify children and to select an elite. Well, we need to push children. We need a fiscal reform. And make some changes in various taxes. I didn't mention wealth inequalities, which are great. Financial product must be more sophisticated, like bonds. They must be accessible to middle class that usually make savings in financial products which are not too sophisticated. Thank you very much, Patrick, which gave him an overview of France. He gave us all the tools we need, but there's one thing he didn't say. At the political level, middle class is desirable. It can generate consumption on the economic point of level. And over to the minister from India. What is the situation of the middle class in India? For a long time, we've said that it was the engine of the growth in India. There are about 140 million of them. Are you concerned for the middle class, which is said to be fragmented?
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. In India, the middle class is the engine of the growth. And since after COVID, you've seen India remaining the fastest growing large economy. Primarily, it is because of the consumption which is triggering from the middle class, which literally kicks in and then turns around to have the virtuous cycle generating economic activity. 31% of the population is middle class in India as of today. And since 1995, literally a few years after the Indian economy was opened up, otherwise it was a closed economy following the Soviet era model. But after 95 till 2021, the middle class is growing at 6.3% annual rate. And as per OECD's projection, India will surpass China in absolute number terms in its middle class population size, that is between 2030 and 2035. Now, the World Economic Forum has also pointed out to a fundamental shift in India's middle class consumption patterns. Nearly 500 cities are poised to emerge as the new centers of economic activity. There are various reasons for it, but I'll come to it a bit later. Now, by 2036, on the back of several of these kind of measures, we think 93% of all spending in India will be because of the middle class or the slightly affluent consumers. So together put, 93% of all the consumption or the spending on consumption would be from the middle class and from the classes which will be in an affordable level. And again, this middle class is not concentrated in our metropolitan cities. That's a very important thing, especially when I've heard the honorable economist say that wealth gets concentrated in some affordable rich and super rich who are located in some areas. India's model has resulted in the development in such a way that the middle class is present not just in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, or Chennai or Bengaluru, about whom the cities about whom you hear a lot. They are on the contrary in this tier 2, tier 3 cities. So the distribution of wealth is actually therefore automatically seen spreading to cities beyond the metropolitan. So we see the middle class not just as a beneficiary of growth, but actually the engines of growth. It is their consumption which is happening, which is making the economy grow. Now, how would you grow it? And that is why I quoted that number, 6.3% growth. How do you actually bring people to become middle class, let us say from the poorer, deprived areas of our society? Several schemes were launched consciously. The first thing is to get them to be formally into the banking scheme of things, financial inclusion. Prime Minister Modi, 2014, when he became the Prime Minister, first thing was to launch a Jan Dhan account, which is common people's bank accounts opened up in such a way that today we have 248 million people who have moved out of multidimensional poverty, and this number is something which has come from the World Bank and IMF. These people were actually brought into the banking scheme of things through the opening of account. In fact, quite a few people who observed Indian economy commented, and I was a junior minister in the finance at that time in 2014. When we launched the scheme, we were literally criticized, saying, how will you maintain these accounts? The service charges cannot be paid by them. They will not have a minimum balance. How would you want to extend banking facility to them? But we still managed to open the accounts, and I can say many of them are today benefiting further from having entered the banking scheme of things by government giving a sovereign guaranteed loan for them at a concessional rate so that they can do their businesses. So normally when you go to bank saying, I'm starting a business, I need some loan, they ask you for some guarantee or a security. Give your land which you own, or a small house you own, or get some fixed deposit into the bank, and so on. Prime Minister Modi's open statement was, I want these people to get the loan at the concessional rate. I stand guarantee for them. So the guarantee is given by government through a particular agency, which is the deposit guarantee and the guarantee for the loans. As a result, today, some of them have graduated from the lower level of loan giving, which is for small amounts for small businesses, to a second level, to a third level, because their performance has been very prudentially wise, and they have wonderful credit scores today. So we think that has helped. And similarly, the digital connectivity, which India actually showcases to the world, where everyone can use their phone to know about their banking activity and also do their business through the digital QR codes and so on, that we made it a point to say that it shall not just only be on the great phones that you have, the smartphones. We brought it into everybody's access because it is now available in feature phones also and in the respective regional language in which these people are familiar with. As a result, the digital connectivity has helped them to move their business into a higher formal pattern of buying and selling through use of digital methods. That has also improved their credit worthiness, and the banks recognize them. Now, policy support which we gave towards people is to make sure that the GST, which is the indirect tax, the rates were brought down across the board on all commodities. Now, as it is, therefore, there is a lot of consumption. The GST numbers are really growing leaps and bounds, and this is helping small businesses which have just entered into business in a formal fashion. Then I heard again our respected economists saying about education and skilling. Budget after budget, we are giving special allowances and also giving budgetary apportionment of money for building hostels in every district. The tier system that we have, the central government, and then you have the provincial government. Below that, you have the districts, which are the smaller units where elected representatives govern through the Gram Panchayats. We have made a budgetary provision for providing girls' hostels in every one of these districts for those girls who are coming into STEM science education. So whether it is science, technology, engineering, or medicine, they're all coming in there to live there at an affordable rate and acquire the necessary qualification. And I'm happy also to say that AVGC, which is the audiovisual graphic communication through the systems, through the computers, we are giving training for people to become good AVCG experts so that they can get into the area of gaming, also get into the area of digital communication, which is large in India because they're also exporting. It's useful for film industry, and it's now becoming the big thing, contributing into Netflix and Amazon and direct to home. So all the young are getting trained and skilled in those talents.
Maybe just one more minute.
Yes,
And
we've established.
we have the.
Just one more minute, if that's okay. Just one more minute.
5 townships, which are university townships, are extending skilling and training for people again. So we are also putting money into the hands of the people. The last very important point for my opening statement. Earlier, people earning 0.25 million were the only ones who were exempt from paying any income tax. So they didn't have to pay any income tax. We have risen this amount to 1.2 million rupees. So people earning 1.2 million rupees, up to that number, don't pay any tax at all. As a result, we've allowed people to have more money in their hands, which again goes into the consumption cycle and helps in, literally pushing consumption to be the element in making the middle class the engine of India's growth. And lastly, healthcare. Every family is given 5 lakh rupees annually worth of insurance cover. They don't need to spend money from their pockets. It's paperless, it's cashless. To go along with it, all over the country, we've opened citizens' pharmacies where generic medicines are given for those particular ailments, some of them life-saving. 80% reduction in medicine cost for the families. So middle class is supported through these very measures, and they are today, therefore, an engine of India's growth.
Thank you, Mrs. Sitaraman. OK, donc voilà les outils utilisés.
So we've heard about the tools that India uses. We've heard about fiscal measures, the banking system, the education system, access to digital technologies. What's going on in Morocco? I'm going to ask the same question to the minister from Morocco, Ms. Feta. Where's the middle class at in Morocco? How would you describe it? Is there issues that you are finding and that you would take into account as a minister in the government? Thank you very much. Let's just take a bit of time to think about an average family in the region of Blimelek near the mountains in Morocco. 25 years ago, an average couple would be perhaps a teacher with a stay-at-home mother, and their children would be the first children in the family to go to the university. In Morocco today, this family would have both members of the couple working, and their daughter would be choosing between medical studies or engineering studies. That's about demographic changes, but it's about public policy as well. Slow policy changes, but they have been really taking hold. And I think we're in a similar situation to several countries here. Our middle classes are growing 58% in 2025, but it takes a lot of work to grow the middle class. But before I tell you what we're doing, I want to say that in meetings like this, it's talking about what our world is all about. I think middle classes are losing their bearings a bit, and it's the case in Morocco as well. No progress is made. The things that we're hearing is that for some people, becoming middle class is not a success. They want more, that's a good thing. They want to work more, that's a good thing. But the third thing is that they are afraid. They're afraid for their children. Everyone wants their children to go further than themselves. We've all been through inflation crisis and food price crises, and that's what we hear about in terms of public policy. Very often, the middle classes complain that they are the public policy blind spot. A lot of policy is directed towards the middle classes, but I think we need to talk about what means that in our communication strategies, the middle class don't realise everything that's done for them. Let's think about the long-term policy. Under the vision of His Majesty Mohammed VI, that we have a new development model with a target of 2035 for all our KPIs. So we've made three big wagers. These are not slogans, they're three key issues that we're working on at the same time. If we don't do that, we won't achieve it. We've heard that the middle class is afraid. We need to secure things for them so that it grows. So the first issue is social protection. We've got a lot of experts in the room, so I'm going to give you a few examples of what social protection means for us. This government has chosen to put 12% of GDP into social protection. Education, schooling. My parents said that to go to school wasn't a choice. When the middle classes send their children to state-run schools, they're not sure that they will achieve everything they want to. 15% of Moroccan people send their kids to private schools. So we've put in place education reforms, starting with mathematics. And I want to thank my colleague from India, because we've worked together closely with India on issues around education and preschooling, because equality comes from the fact that for middle-class children, they need stimulation from the ages of 4 to 6, but that needs funding as well. So 80% of Moroccan children go to preschool free of charge, and we hope that in a few years' time that coverage will be 100%. The other key issue is housing. For many years there was an issue where people who moved from the countryside to the cities, and there was an issue of social housing. Over the last 5 years we've realised that middle classes need support. They receive funding to the tune of around 7,000 euros to buy housing with state guarantees, like in India, and the state guarantees their deposits. The third area is labour and working. The economy needs to create enough jobs for the middle class that we've formed. So we've invested, we've driven growth to fairly high rates, around 5%, but it's still not building enough work. There are three issues in terms of labour. Firstly, the informal sector. Let's not talk about why there's an informal sector, but our job is to create the conditions for people to switch into the formal sector. Self-employment, sole traders. We've reduced income tax rates so that people can work, pay tax, and we've also got a major lever that we can operate, which is the rate of women's work. So we're working on creches, preschooling, nurseries, in order to enable women to work. Another area we focus on is the territories and regional policies. Half of our population are rural people. If you compare the rural areas with the cities, there's a sense of insecurity. If people don't feel safe in their homes, they feel like they can't move forward. So we have programs that are specialised region by region with certain economic and business specialisations in each different regions. We've got a regeneration plan, and our aim is to create 400,000 households in the middle classes with access to school. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Feta. Don't worry, you've got time to come back. This is just the first round of questions. That's why I said 6 minutes each, but we're going to come back to you, don't worry. Véronique Bédac, we've heard from our first two panelists. Both of them mentioned this issue of housing. You work on the ground in housing, but you have also been a politician. You've worked within the Prime Minister's office in France. You know how public policy operates. Housing is one of the points that we have in common in terms of the concerns for middle classes. Is this an international issue? Is it a cross-border issue? Well, in my view, I think it's very interesting to hear what our two colleagues have said about the middle classes, but in some senses the middle class is the same. They have similar aspirations from one country to the next. The middle class is defined first of all by working, people who want to work. They have income from their labour. There's a need for security, financial security, and in particular asset security, the fact of being a home owner. And so middle classes, I think, share an ambition to own their own homes. And I imagine that that's the case right around the world. I think that in your countries there's the similar aspiration for security, to own one's own home and to feel like one has a secure place in society. In our country, in France, I don't know if it's the same in your countries, but in France, the thing that is a real dividing line runs through the middle classes is the ability to buy one's own home, and that's where we do have a split. One part of the middle classes are able to become homeowners, and some others will never be able to own their own home. And when we ask the question, why are some middle class people unable to buy their own home? Partly it was because they weren't able to buy at the times when the interest rates were low enough, or they haven't got any assets that they own or that they've inherited. So this ownership of assets is the split between different middle class people. I imagine the situation is the same in Portugal, because the context is fairly similar, but the asset ownership is the main split in the middle classes. So in some senses there is one middle class, but the question is whether promises are fulfilled, the promise for work and labour, the promise for home ownership. I imagine that in some countries the promise is kept. You've talked about some fears and concerns in Morocco, for example. But if the promise of home ownership no longer holds, then the middle class splits. So there can be different levels of middle classes. The minister from India is talking a lot about expanding and growing the middle class, but the minister from Morocco talks about fear and concern. But I think in France there's a fear of decline. Middle classes are fearing the decline of their situation, perhaps with different timelines and different specific fears. Some of the countries are trying to meet the needs, meet the concerns of the middle classes. Middle class people in Europe often think that public policy doesn't work for them, that everyone else is targeted but not the middle class. Housing is the first thing that provides security. I think governments have the idea they want to directly help the middle classes. I know that there's a lot of mechanisms. There's mechanisms in Morocco to help homeowners. In India, I think Portugal has focused a bit more on supply side issues, but there is support to help target the middle classes, to give financial support to help them to become homeowners. And my contribution to this panel would be to say that from our perspective today, we need to take care of the housing supply. Middle classes need to be able to afford, to access certain key things like housing, and perhaps the ability to eat out, to buy a car, to access education. There are some social goods which are becoming harder and harder for middle classes to afford, and we need to work on the prices. It's difficult. It's perhaps more difficult to work on the cost of producing an asset rather than providing direct support. So when we build houses, there are people who are already homeowners who are saying, don't like the way you're building here, the building height is too high, there's the NIMBY factor where, so there's one issue which is to try and stop the insiders putting up the walls and keeping the outsiders out. I don't know what the situation is in India or Morocco, but in France, the administrative procedures for home building are so complicated, the formalities required are so lengthy, and time is money, as we know. So I think there's a major issue which isn't easy to resolve, but we need to simplify planning procedures in order to increase housing supply, because if we make housing available and affordable to the middle classes, we will give the middle classes hope. Thank you very much, Veronica Bedag. We'll hand the floor now to the Portuguese Minister of Finances, Joaquim Miranda Sarmento. Very easy question for you. Do you think Portuguese people think that their children are doing better than their parents' generation? What are the fears of the middle classes?
In English, otherwise my French would embarrass me. Well, Portugal, like any other advanced economy, have the same challenge and the same difficulties of other countries like France, Germany, or the US, or any other advanced economy. Where do we stand today when we compare our society and our middle class with 30 or 40 years ago? We saw a reduction of the percentage of middle class in the overall population. Not a big decline, but a significant one. Middle class are smaller, are shrinking than they were 30 or 40 years ago. But more important, we saw in this last year, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, a stagnation of real incomes of most of the population. And at the same time, a reduction on the share of the total income from this part of the population, which should not surprise us. I mean, wealth is becoming more and more about companies, about technology. We see that on the big US technological firms that are their market value increasing and increasing. So there is stagnation on real incomes and a reduction on the middle class incomes as a share of total incomes. And at the same time that we have this effect on incomes, we're seeing that the cost of maintaining a middle class lifestyle is increasing, especially on services, housing, health, education. And on housing, this means more debt, more repayment, and more interest costs, more costs at the end in terms of net present value. It's true that it also brings a higher asset value, but it is sustainable in the long term. And still on housing, there is a generation gap. All the generations who already have a house and have amortized the debt of the house are seeing an increase on the asset value, and younger generations having more and more difficulty to access to affordable housing. And then there is the labor market, a strong disruption in traditional economy, in manufacturing, in administrative and public sector jobs, with technology changing partners, with different types of jobs and the need for different and more skills. What should be the course of action on what we're trying to do in Portugal? Well, basically, a society only creates a middle class and only gives hope, just like the Portuguese society in the 80s and 90s, where I grew up, where my parents were very confident about what the future would be. We have just created a democracy in '74. Then in '86, we entered the European Union, and the country started developed, and there was a lot of confidence about where we would be 34 years from now, or at that time, and that confidence was significantly lost. To recover that confidence and in any advanced economy, we need two outcomes. We need to increase social mobility. We need to make sure that people who are on the downside can go up. Public school is the most efficient way to do it. I'm a product of a public school. I studied in Portugal in the 80s and 90s. I went to university in 96. And if there weren't public schools, I wouldn't have gone to university. I wouldn't have gone to Tilburg to do a PhD. I wouldn't be a finance minister. But more important, I wouldn't be a professor at university. So we need to increase social mobility, and we need to increase the resilience of middle class to shocks. How we should do it, and I still have 2 minutes, thank you. First, we need to increase productivity. That's the main problem, especially in Europe. And there is a huge gap of productivity when we compare to the US, especially since 2008. And that's education and human capital, technology and connectivity, reduce regulations and taxes, a huge problem of Europe, industrial policy that Europe has forgot for 30 years, and increase entrepreneurship. Second, we need affordable houses. And that means increasing supply with technology. We need to improve the land use regulation. There's not sufficient land to build in many countries like Portugal. We need more public houses. And we need to create tax and public incentives. In Portugal, for the people under 35, we have created a special income tax where people under 35 pay half or less than half the income tax that they should pay according to their incomes. And they have a tax exemption when they're buying their first house. And that tax exemption saves them 15,000 euros on tax costs. Third issue, we should focus on wealth and income creation. GDP growth is fundamental, but we also need redistribution. We need taxes that can redistribute wealth. We need to increase savings. We need to use pensions to finance market, and we need to robust our welfare state. 4, immigration. We need better regulation and control according to the economic and labor needs of each country. 5th and last, we need better government, better public services, government and public spending efficiency. We need infrastructures, we need public service coverage and quality. Why? The reason why middle class is angry, the reason why, and to conclude, the reason why extreme parties on the right and the left have been growing so much and in some cases reaching power in some countries is obviously the stagnation on incomes, is the job loss, but it's also the fact that people feel that the government is no longer providing the public services that they need at the quality and quantity necessary. Thank you.
Merci.
Do you have a comment? We still have 15 minutes to discuss. So let's keep on talking, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question in the audience? Just to see how much time we have left. I see 2 questions. Very good.
There was no translation. I was just asking people if they have questions, so that, because we've got 15 minutes left. Is it translating now? En fait, vous avez tous les réponses. Les problèmes.
Problems have been identified, and you are the government. You're responsible for public policy. What's the most difficult thing, and what's working? What works best?
Identify the problem, and you know what should be done. You've got a complete analysis. So, in your eyes, what is the most difficult to do, and what is the most efficient to do, so that you help the middle class, either to stay in the middle class, either to go and belong to the middle class, achieve it. Maybe in a few minutes, so that the discussion is vivid. Maybe quick answers. Mrs. Sitaraman. Alors peut-être, est-ce que vous... Donc ce que j'ai demandé, c'est ce sont des dirigeants. Qu'est-ce qui est le plus difficile? Qu'est-ce qui marche?
So the question, these are the leaders, what works best? Let's start a discussion on that issue.
Before I respond to your particular question, I'd like to respond to the issue of affordable housing for poor, for the middle class. In India, we have a governmental scheme where affordable houses are defined to what value it should be, because the same affordable house in a metropolitan town like Mumbai would cost more than an affordable house elsewhere. So we have defined what is a middle class affordable house. Through banks, we provide subsidized interests for people who want to buy affordable houses. So middle class is surely taken care of when they want to buy an asset, buy a house at a concessional rate. So just that. It is one thing for countries like India to be able to get people out of poverty, bring them on to what is defined as middle class, and give them the skill, give them the education, also provide them internship opportunities through which they understand what the job market requires, so that they can ready themselves to be job ready and be able to get some jobs. Other than that, we also give them concessional loans to set up their own enterprise. Every bank branch in the vast India is instructed to give for one woman at least, one scheduled caste who have been socially kept backward. Now they are now given every right. So for them, and a tribal. So banks, through every one of their brick and mortar branch, will have to give them loans at a concessional rate without any security taken for setting up their own enterprise. So finding job is one thing, or you set up your own enterprise is another, for which government gives money, and they are in the process becoming good startups, innovative ideas. Some of them have become more than 100 unicorns within a matter of 7 years in India. So that is one way we were able to get in. But the most difficult one is about how we can keep them there without dropping down back again.
Peut-être, est-ce qu'on prend...
Should we take some questions now, perhaps? Let's hear from the floor. There's a few questions. Let's get some microphones going around. Perhaps the gentleman at the back there. Let's take 3 questions. There's a young lady at the front. Short question, please. I wanted to ask, what is the weight of the informal sector in the Moroccan economy and the Indian economy, and how do you identify the middle classes within the informal sector? Thank you, sir. So the first question was about the weight of the informal economy. Second question, I was very surprised to hear about the process of middle-classation, if you could call it that, is seen as a positive thing in your countries, because in France, the sociologists talk about it in more negative terms, because we see splits between different classes, higher classes, lower classes, and the differences between different levels of the middle classes, because sometimes the middle classes have a sense of having less opportunity, particularly for young people and children. So in France, the perception of becoming middle class is a bit more different, a bit more nuanced. So how can you maintain the positive perception of the middle classes in the future when there are fewer opportunities for young people? How would you compare your countries to France, which sees the middle classes in a more negative light in sociological terms? How can you maintain this positive perception in your countries? So for you, middle class means something negative, does it? Well, in sociology, we're taught that becoming middle class is a process that creates inequality. Okay. Final question. Let's go to the gentleman near the front who raised his hand here. Short question, please. We had a bit of sociology. That's nice, but let's keep it short, please. So, in Morocco, feel like you're doing similar things to what we did in France that led to the collapse of the middle classes? Are you doing anything to avoid that happening in Morocco? A lot of the questions are to Ms. Feta from Morocco, so let's focus on Morocco for a little bit here. There's one question I'm not going to answer. I do observe what goes on in France, but we are busy enough with Morocco. We do have to look for good examples around the world and adapt them to our context in Morocco. With respect to the informal sector, some people say the figure is 30% in Morocco, but the most important thing is to provide social protection. Let me give you a very interesting figure in this slide. So for 60 years, only 8 million Moroccan people were signed up to social security. After COVID and a reform, 20 million further people joined in 18 months because for the first time they could get care from public hospitals. The level of care wasn't amazing, but they could also get healthcare from private hospitals subsidized by the state. So we say to Moroccan people, working in the informal sector has a cost for you, it has a cost for public policy, but it has a cost for you, and we have to demonstrate that it's useful for people to move out of the informal sector. And with respect to the question of young people, I think we need to work together on all issues with the same level of energy. Governments have choices to make. Obviously, you can't do everything. That means not making a choice, but we will have a political class in the future which won't be challenged by the middle classes, not because the middle classes are ungrateful, but because they want more. Let me give you an example. In Morocco, it took 7 years to put together a register of the different social benefits for the lower income classes. But once we started to distribute this support to 4 million households, you think that at the time Wi-Fi was considered to be a luxury. These days, if we say to ourselves that we want children to have support at school and that digital technologies are fundamental, can we still say for the most vulnerable populations that with a 20 euro cost you're no longer vulnerable? Governments need to think about these things. Prices are going through the roof. We need to maintain our levels of ambition and say to our young people, yes, you have a good future ahead of you, and we're working towards that as best as we can. Thank you very much.
Avant de passer peut-être la parole à...
I don't know if someone else wants to speak, but before we hand over to Patrick to wrap up, I just want to ask a question to Ms. Sitaraman. In India, which is a very digitalized country, do you think artificial intelligence will challenge the life prospects of your middle classes? Maybe you could speak into that for 2 minutes.
Actually, many of those who are now in a position to understand AI, meet the challenge, give solutions, are all from the middle class. Because spread of education, particularly higher education, into STEM had taken literally 30, 40 years of India's part of higher education boosting. Today, majority of those who want to have solutions in AI come from middle class. Equally, they are the ones who are upskilling themselves so that they can further themselves with AI at their hands. Now, for those who fear that they may be thrown out because of AI, there is immense lot of government support for AI-driven skilling camps. All over the country, we have at the district level skilling camps into which private partnership is coming in. Industry is coming in to say, this is the kind of AI skill I need in young people so that I can recruit them. So it is not a training which government does as though we know the solutions. Industry themselves are participating in it, and therefore the middle class today is able to see, particularly India's economy, if you were just to take one indicator, 40% of all that we export is because of MSMEs, the micro, small, medium industries. Now, these industries are fast adapting AI model of business, and for which they are seeking people to come and give them AI-driven solutions. So much before AI became a negative thing about, oh, will it take away jobs? We are now seeing AI-readied young going and taking jobs in industry to give them the AI capabilities. And that is one of the reasons you find that of all the global capability centers, which are getting established all over the country, world, data centers which are getting established all over the world, India has the maximum number in one country because you have skilled manpower who's able to take it.
Est-ce que... Je vais donner donc, si...
If no one else has something to say, I'm going to hand over to Patrick Artus to wrap up for us, just in 1 minute. So, we've heard from different countries, India and Morocco, where the middle classes are growing and have a fairly optimistic point of view, and France, and perhaps to a lesser extent Portugal, where the middle classes are slightly declining and the countries are rather pessimistic. And I wonder whether this difference is about different types of public policy. Does it mean that India and Morocco have the right public policies in favour of housing, education, job creation in order to keep the middle classes growing and staying optimistic? Does it mean that France and Portugal are not putting in place those kind of policies, or is it just a question of the level of development? Morocco and India have levels of growth of 6 to 8%, and they've converted an informal sector into the formal sector. France and Portugal have got much lower rates of growth, and with this low growth rate alongside the ageing population means that governments have less and less money and less scope for putting in place certain policies. So I don't know if it's just an issue of the development cycle. India and Morocco perhaps at an early stage in the development cycle, and Portugal and France are later on in the cycle. But I don't know if it's that or an issue of public policy. I think India and Morocco are very happy to hear those positive words, so we need to congratulate our French and Portuguese speakers.